Very good. This is hilarious.
Let's see what we can do with this.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Today we're talking to the man behind the camera, Douglas Simkin.
That's me.
This man has been filming our expert insights for such a long time, and now it's his time to shine. Welcome, Douglas.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Now, what I would like to do is talk to you about your research. So, for such a long time, you've been listening to other people's research. Now, Douglas, one thing that I think we need to correct right now is that you've got some of your hat hanging out underneath
Oh
here.
no, that's not sun-safe at all.
You're styling. That's much better.
That's much better, isn't
better.
it?
No need to tie it up. We don't need to take it down that far. Now, Doug. May I call you Doug?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Doug, you've been behind our camera, but now you're in front of our camera. So we'd like you to share some of your research with our greater audience of none right here today with
It's
us.
a busy crowd today.
It's a busy crowd
Big
today.
day at the office, actually.
So tell us, Doug, about your research. Although it's not connected to young children, I think it does have an impact on young children.
I think so, yeah.
Go forward and give us your overview.
It's kind of interesting that you say that, actually, because I was thinking about yesterday, I was like reading over my proposal and kind of what I've written in my thesis. And I was thinking, is it possible to tie it to young children? I think there are some, maybe kind of it's more lessons for parents, I think.
You're absolutely right. And this might be where we get serious and take off our
Okay.
paraphernalia. Because we want this message to be taken seriously, and it actually is a really serious message. So can you start by telling us exactly what you're researching?
So,
I just turned up my glasses. They went wild.
Oh, that's funny. So I'm doing a PhD where I look at the effects of the internet on war journalism, and that's kind of how it started. I did an honours thesis kind of on a similar topic in 2014, and then decided to kind of take that and run with it a bit further. And that was the original premise. So it still has the same title, but it's kind of evolved over the last 5 years, I would say, into.
So what was it that first interested you in the subject?
When I was a kid, my dad showed me a photo taken by a guy called Robert Capa, who was he was a Hungarian photographer during the Second World War, and he took photographs of conflict before that, and he took this really famous photograph of, it's called The Soldier at the Moment of Death, and it's like during the Spanish Civil War in the mid-1930s, I think, and it's a photo just as this guy has kind of got shot, and he's kind of like going backwards, and it's like just the most classic, like, it's pretty much the birth of kind of traditional kind of war photography, which I was always interested in. And then, because my dad's a pretty avid photographer as well, and he showed me a lot of the work of Tim Page, who was in Vietnam, and he took some pretty powerful photographs, and then I kind of just followed it from there. And then I was looking for something to do when I finished uni, and I didn't really kind of have any prospects at the time, to be honest. But
You were opening yourself up.
yeah, I had ideas of what I wanted to do, and then my a guy who I had as a kind of subject coordinator for every digital media subject that I did over the course of my undergrad, I spoke to him about doing an honours thesis with him, and he was on board, and so we kind of went ahead with it.
So it's kind of drawing all of those different threads together, which is what the best research is
Yeah.
that there's something that's quite influential. And I think when you're talking about that, the idea of the war photography, I mean, there mustn't have been that much photography that captured those moments. I think we're a bit inured to it now, where we sort of see that all the time, but that photography must have been, and must have really impacted you, because it was
pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Like, my dad was the kind of guy who'd always have he'd have books, like he'd have like Time Life books that were like these thick kind of encyclopedias, just hundreds of pages of like war photos from like the Pacific Theatre in the Second World War, or even stuff older than that as well. And it's like, I remember as a kid, I'd just kind of sit there just looking at them, just fascinated for hours at a time.
Yep.
And it was like, some of it was pretty gory, but like at the same time you could see it for what it was as well.
Well, it's out of your experience, I suppose,
Yeah.
and then it's just capturing something that nobody else is going to capture at that point in time.
Exactly. It's kind of like
amazing.
just a moment frozen, you know.
Yeah. So what was your master's thesis on?
So that was a more simplified version of what I'm doing now, and it was literally like what happens to conflict reporting when it's on the internet. And that started off, like, didn't really know kind of how to approach that. And Ted, who was my supervisor, he was actually on study leave for the first half of the year. So I kind of was just like doing what I thought it was about, which was all right. But then he got back and he pulled me into his office and he, like, I remember like it was yesterday, he's got like these like 20 pages or something. And I was probably not even that many, to be honest. It might have been like 10 or 15 that I'd written in like 4 months. He's like, so this is good, Doug. He's like, but have a look at this and we'll see what you think about it. And then he proceeded to show me these videos on YouTube of like in Syria, the Syrian army were just like strapping GoPros to the top of tanks and like just filming everything. And he showed me like hours and hours of this footage and it just like blew my mind. It was like a totally different dynamic.
So what was their motivation to do something like that? The people who were filming?
It depends how you look at it, really. Like the motivation of that kind of stuff, it's very different to kind of traditional journalism, I guess. It's like, it's just raw data. Like they never really put a spin on it in the video. They didn't really kind of cut it together to make too much of a story. It was always just like the videos, I think they've been deleted now, but they went for sometimes 90 minutes or 2 hours just of a GoPro sitting there, just filming this tank driving around. Sometimes it'd shoot at stuff, sometimes nothing had happened. And they just upload it and you could have a look at it and make of it what you would.
So they were just kind of documenting what their experience was?
Yeah, exactly. Just with like these raw information.
With no agenda, it was really like they didn't have the motivation to...
No, it didn't really tell a story. Like the interesting thing that happened was people would combine different clips together that were videos from different people who had done the same thing on different sides. And you get the people would actually, because like this kind of was going all over forums like Reddit and stuff, and people were combining these different angles into coherent structured, like just random internet users, like no one of any kind of professional training or anything. And then there's a really famous example, which is a video which is called Death of a Tank, and it's like there's a GoPro on one Syrian tank and then it's kind of following another one, and then they found a video from a discarded cell phone from some insurgents, and their angle was like in a building about 200 meters away, looking at the two tanks, and then one of them shoots the front tank with a grenade launcher, and then it cuts back to the GoPro on the tank, and so you can see both sides, and it's like that's never happened before. That was in terms of like kind of conflict reporting, it was something totally outside the kind of the traditional way of even journalism. It was totally different.
Well, because you are always being presented with what is the perspective of the person behind the camera, or, I mean, unless they have a commitment to sharing both sides of the story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it takes that beyond that kind of embedded journalism, because, again, you're only hearing the perspective of that person who's
exactly.
in that, and whatever network they're reporting for.
Yeah, 100%.
So what about your PhD research then? Do you move that along?
Yeah, so that kind of it takes that and goes to the next level, and it kind of explores a lot of stuff to do with framing and how information's framed. And it's like trying to open the, like black box is the best term to like dive into how all that kind of conflict stuff works, and the actual dynamics at play between the users who are kind of generating content and then the people who are curating it and looking at it online and kind of furthering the narrative and using that content for their own narrative as well.
So if you're talking about the framing and the narrative, are you looking at the different framing, and what is that? Like what is the way that something very similar could be framed? Okay,
so there's a really it's funny that I have to like bring this up, but so Trump said once this really profound thing actually, which is like, it blew my mind that he said it, but he said in an interview once, he said that the facts are true, but the news is fake. And like on the surface, that's kind of like, it's up there with that talk about the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. It's like on the surface, it sounds kind of a bit like, okay, going. But like I looked into that and then I started kind of applying that phrase to what I was looking at. And it's like, you can have an assemblage of facts that, like, the fact of the piece of information could be true, but the way that it's assembled along with other contextually kind of dependent pieces of information, you create this kind of complex network of objects and pieces of information and photos and videos and ideas and like even companies and politicians and celebrities all come into this complex frame, and it can kind of shape the way that a piece of information is then perceived by the person viewing it. So it's like you have an event, a thing will happen, and then it'll pass through this filter. And it's kind of like we were talking about, I think we brought it up in the office the other day about event, frame and story. I said that my supervisor was looking into that a bit, and it's kind of like you have this thing happens and then it passes through this filter, and then you get a story that comes from that. And people...
Rather than the story itself in its raw form. Is put together in a particular way. And I think historically we've had the experience of that in things like the construction of, filming during Nazi Germany.
Absolutely. 100%. Like Leni Riefenstahl she was very good at that.
She created the story, didn't she?
Yeah,
she
did.
really sort of constructed it.
Yeah.
Even stage managed it.
Yeah, 100%. And then that kind of, that story kind of was so powerful that it almost kind of, it rejigged the whole frame of how Nazi Germany was kind of perceived outside at that time. Like that was even nominated for awards and stuff in the US at the time as well, because people were just like, oh, it's a good movie.
and she made it look like a good regime as well, didn't she? So in a
absolutely.
way, the filmmaker is responsible then for
100%.
making something much worse in a sense, or not allowing the true story to be told.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's very easy to manipulate pieces of information in a certain way so that it kind of builds the story that you're after. It's like reverse engineering the story, kind of in a way, I guess you could say.
Well, it's just picking the outcome and then constructing
yes,
everything
exactly.
around
It's
it,
like, I want this to happen, so what do I need to build into this story? And then you're like, there you go.
And everyone's a filmmaker these days, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because everybody can build the story. I was watching this British drama, I think it was The Capture. Have you seen that
No, I
one?
haven't.
It's worth a look.
I can't put that to the list.
But it's interesting because in this, I sort of shouldn't spoil it for either of us, but I'll spoil it for you now, is that they will take footage and recreate it into something because they know that someone's guilty, but they don't have the evidence for it.
Yeah, okay.
So they would then create the story around something else.
That's interesting.
So that then they could prosecute them, or they could, do whatever they needed to do.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting take on, the truth, I suppose, was that they felt those people were better out of circulation, so they created the story around them to
get rid of them. That's so interesting.
Yeah, and it was well done.
Yeah.
Really well done, and lots of moral dilemmas within that.
Yeah.
But I suppose that's what we're seeing all the time now, is the construction of a story. It's hard to even... Like, I'm almost at the point where I don't want to watch anything because I don't know what the truth is anymore.
Yeah, exactly. That's like, there's the classic saying that we live in like a post-truth era, which I think is true to many extents, but I think also kind of like we're in a world now where there's like all there is, like what I've come to realise from my research is there's nothing more important than framing. Like framing is everything, and we're living in a world where every story or every opinion or every way that something is presented, it's just it's just like a war of different types of frames because they use the same information all presented in different ways. Yeah. And it's really difficult to kind of to find any kind of truth in that.
So how then do you find the truth? Like I mean, I'm sort of thinking of how young children are engage with media, and then how do parents manage that, or how do people around them manage that?
I think from what I've discovered, the only way that you can really find the truth now is in what kind of happens after the fact. So it's really frustrating actually, because you have to be patient and you have to wait and see.
You have to wait for it to unfold.
Yeah,
really?
Exactly. Yeah, you kind of do, and you can, because there's so many kind of articles saying like this is going to happen in global politics, or like global warming and like all this kind of stuff, and there's so many competing narratives around it that, I mean, you can kind of have your opinions about whichever narrative you want like to subscribe to based on like kind of everyone has their own separate worldview, right? So it makes sense, but you can only really tell what the truth is based on the kind of the outcomes after the fact. And then I think you can use that information that happens that you come across. You can use that kind of as a bit of a barometer.
Yeah.
In going forwards, as to like.
To sort of construct your thinking around the
Yeah.
outcome.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's kind of deep and reflective thinking, though. Do we all have time to do that? I just don't know whether we do. I just think it's like people want to turn on the 6 o'clock news and
just
be told the truth and understand what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's got to be. That's the thing about news media, is that it's always packaged so nicely that it has like it's the beginning, a middle, and an end of the story. Whereas like with internet culture in particular, there's always just ongoing narratives with no end point. Like there's there are narratives that may never have an end. Like there's the conversation always kind of keeps on going.
Yeah.
It's more of like a dialogue in that respect. Like whether that goes from kind of people just talking about certain topics over to conspiracy theories or anything like that. Like there's always kind of more information that can be presented that will further the case either way and keep conversation.
Does it bring in like a new era of citizen journalism, do you think, or is that open to the same sort of
I think it does. It really depends on how much freedom the tech giants give the individual user. I think citizen journalism, as we kind of knew it through the Arab Spring, I think is kind of, I wouldn't say dead, but that was like kind of the golden age of it was literally when it started, and then it kind of declined ever since. But you have this kind of weird dynamic where you have kind of content curation, which is what happens when people kind of sift through all the information that is online just in their spare time, and they can kind of compile that. I think that's where the new citizen journalism, if you want to call it that, is kind of coming from.
Citizen curation.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Journalism, isn't
it is, and like people.
But then isn't that the same thing? Like you can curate what you see and what you like to.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I like to put together a story that works for my story.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think it is. I think it probably is the same in many respects, but I think like the age of being impressed by someone filming something on their smartphone and then posting it to the internet is kind of, that's almost the new normal now.
Yeah.
In many respects. Like that's, I don't watch television anymore. I just watch YouTube mostly, and that's
But
about
how do you
it.
know that you're seeing the truth?
You never do, because you always have to analyse what you're reading or what you're watching, and you know that even when it's like the ideal scenario is literally just having a GoPro on top of a tank where there's no commentary about it and you just see it for what it is. But everything these days, because people, I guess that's what I mean by citizen journalism being dead, is that it's so easy now for people. People have gotten very good, kind of almost not even through practicing doing it, but just subconsciously. People have gotten very good at framing things themselves.
Yeah.
So they the power of framing information used to reside kind of with like the big news companies, but now individuals have that power, and it took a couple years. There was a bit of a lag time between them realising that power and them. Now they definitely know that they have that power. So all of that user-produced content is kind of framed in whichever way it wants to, and it pushes an agenda more often than not. And that's why I think citizen journalism is kind of, it's not the raw data stuff anymore. It's literally like they're pushing things kind of to whichever way. Yeah. And that's why finding the truth is difficult. That's why you kind of need to look at as many different perspectives as possible, I think, and then kind of wait and see what happens. And if there's any kind of YouTubers or people on Twitter that you kind of follow, and if their narrative of what happened was kind of closer to the truth than others, you can be like, well, maybe in this situation they were more on the pulse, as they say.
Like I said, I think that takes a lot of reflection, a lot of time to think. So really, like most people are just gathering information to confirm their own bias.
Definitely.
Their own, or gathering evidence or whatever. So, are we just going to have to accept that we're in this kind of era that this is what happens, and that people are?
I think people are very vulnerable to information now. And I think it is because there's so much more. There's so much going on day to day anyway, that to be kind of so in tune and looking at all these different pieces of information and trying to figure it all out.
Are you doing some creative pieces for your PhD?
I am.
What do they involve?
So there's a component of three creative works, and they're basically designed to show how people can kind of make online propaganda. So there's this weird movement online called. What I'm doing is a combination of war photography and then this thing called Vaporwave, which is like almost like a cyberpunk kind of Blade Runner type aesthetic with like neon lights and like it's a really weird like kind of relaxed like music and stuff. And what people do is, I don't know how this happened, but someone once decided to put that kind of aesthetic, those qualities over the top of like war videos and stuff.
Right.
And it's kind of, I've been looking at it a lot, and it's really interested me because I think it's kind of the new age of conflict propaganda that's specifically designed to target kind of Generation Z, I would say.
Yeah.
Because it has a lot of the same aesthetics of like Snapchat filters and TikTok filters and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I've showed it to people in class before, and they're from that generation, and they find it relatable. So
they find war or conflict.
They find the aesthetic relatable.
Right.
They don't understand why it's been put over the top of war videos yet.
Yeah.
But like there are countries in Eastern Europe that are solely using this as their social media, like on their actual on their military accounts and stuff.
Yeah. So it's kind of like you can't relate to a little sort of sped up movie of D-Day or something like that, because it feels like it's too far away and too in the past.
Yeah.
So this is a more relatable medium.
Yes.
But
yeah,
then
exactly.
what's the intention of that?
That's a good question. I had a chat to my supervisor about it, and I kind of thought that I kind of put the question forward as the intention to weaponise. Like, is the intention to weaponise youth? And we kind of had a bit of a chat about that, because that's really all I can think of it as being.
So it's not to radicalise people, it's just to actually normalise
violence
this
and conflict.
violence and conflict and make it kind of nice.
Yeah, because it packages it up in like it's pretty cool. Like you look at it and you're like, oh, it's cool.
So are we, which is terrifying.
Yeah,
but
it is.
Are we rewiring people's brains to see this stuff in that way? Or are they already wired to see it that way?
That's a deep question.
It is, isn't it?
I don't know. I think given how far we are removed from having kind of experienced like mass global conflict, and the loss that comes from that, and the actual kind of the physical like pain that would come from experiencing an event like that, it leaves people extremely vulnerable to being radicalised. Radicalised is the wrong word, because like that has connotations either way. But
That's
I think
the framing of radicalisation.
Exactly. But I think weaponised is a better word, because it's about like getting people to be more comfortable with there to be kind of societal violence, and not and almost dehumanising other groups and like depersonalising from them. And if you can do it in this weird way, it's kind of like a lot of this stuff reminds me a lot of Call of Duty in like many respects.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because like as a parent of adult children, Call of Duty and those sorts of things were coming through when my children were younger.
Yeah.
And I was always really strict about the use of...
Same. My mum was too.
Yeah, really, really strict about the use of technology, because there wasn't that much of it.
No.
But also, that was kind of... The first person shooting stuff was absolutely banned. Now, that's not to say they don't use it now, because they do.
Yeah.
But I found that it was really aberrant to me that young children were being given the facility to do that kind of play.
Yeah, exactly.
And then to see the Christchurch shooting play out in exactly the same way. And I'm not saying that that's what, like, I don't know what the evidence shows us about that, but it's almost like we're not so shocked by that.
Yeah, 100%. That's definitely the angle I come at it from. Like, I don't know enough about the psychology of kind of video games or anything to really
no, neither do I.
have an opinion about that.
It's just my perspective.
It's
just my framing of the story.
Yeah. But it's like, it's definitely what you said about it's kind of like we're almost like if you're exposed to violence in a different way, then it kind of, like it means cognitively, I feel like it just means it's less of a problem. Like, and I think, it's interesting, like that's like, I've got a whole section in one of my chapters called, it's the Call of Duty aesthetic, like people wear body cams in Syria and stuff, like little cameras here, and they're running around shooting stuff and everything. Like it's very similar to that. And it's really interesting how the style of kind of war reporting now almost reflects the video games that people have kind of grown up playing in their youth. It's interesting.
Which is very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a whole thesis on
there is.
and the way that
Definitely.
that works. And I suppose it's like taking the experience and really making it part of what other people are experiencing. You can't just report on it. You've got to take them there. They've got to be in it, which is a bit terrifying to me in that sense.
Yeah, definitely.
But what's the redeeming? I always like to have a redeeming feature of these things. I always like redemption. So what do you think is redeeming about this type of approach?
I think that the redeeming thing is that if people can be made aware of what's happening in terms of like the information that they consume, then that's such a powerful antidote to being kind of caught up in it. And it just gives you like, I think one of the things I think should be like a mandatory part of children's education is the ability to understand media and understand what media does, because like media is like I teach students who are doing like, they're like maybe 18, 20, 22, whatever, and like they spend like 6 to 8 hours a day on Instagram and TikTok and stuff. And when you have a thing that consumes so much of someone's life, yet they don't actually understand the effects of like what that's doing to their mind, or like how messages are kind of portrayed on the internet, or even just from consuming media, I feel like it leaves people so vulnerable. And if like, hopefully by kind of like what I'm showing here with like how it all works, that could be maybe the basis one day for kind of arming a new generation of people to kind of have the skills to understand like different frames and how information's portrayed to them, and then how, I think like if you give people the toolkit to be able to understand what's happening, then they're far less likely to kind of get caught up in.
So to think critically.
Yeah.
I mean, when you talk about children, a lot of high quality early childhood education is about thinking critically.
Yeah.
So it's embedding that critical thinking and
definitely.
reflective thinking within the kind of landscape for young children, and then hopefully they'll be discerning about their...
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah. And, if they can't do that, then maybe they should just get out in nature. What do you reckon?
I think that's a great idea.
Get out there,
go for a bushwalk
be
or
amongst
something.
in nature, and do not and do not watch television.
No.
You see,
No more TV.
our mothers were right, wasn't
they were.
Don't
100%.
watch too much television. It rots your brain. I think
does.
that's what my mother used to say.
That's what my mum always told me as
Rots
well.
your brain, yeah. There you go, you see. Mothers are always right.
They are. That's
Well, I
for
think
sure.
that's an excellent way to finish our expert insights.
That was great.
Doug, thanks for talking.
Thanks for having me.
Within this expert insights, and it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, it has. Thank you very much.